Okay, I got to know what's important to me. But to do that, and let me do a couple things first. Let's do some background. And we for those who don't know, earlier today, the Far South Side CAC and other community leaders had a press conference today talking about education funding. And I think it's important for us to understand the rules of the game if we're going to play the game effectively. Is that all right?
And
Yes.
totally agree.
So, in order for us to understand who we are, what we're dealing with, and what we're the rules of the game, we got to understand what the Illinois General Assembly is all about. So, the Illinois House of Representatives, there are 118 members, 67 Democrats, 51 Republicans. So that means that Democrats hold a majority in the Illinois House. That does not mean, however, that the Democrats hold a supermajority, that the Democrats could overturn any gubernatorial vetoes or things like that. We would need Republican buy-in to do that. So everybody ever heard the governor say that the supermajority of Democrats just do whatever they want? Anybody ever heard the governor say that? So clearly those numbers, that's not true. That just doesn't pan out. And what is also true, Democrats they're not monolithic. You have suburban Democrats, you have Chicago Democrats, you have downstate Democrats. We're very different. We have different perspectives. Not everybody is from the city of Chicago. We have rural Democrats. So you have individuals who have different perspectives. So we're not always going to vote the same. So, next one. Same is true in the Illinois Senate. The Illinois Senate, there are 59 members, 37 Democrats, 22 Republicans. Now, the Illinois Senate does have a supermajority. But again, they still have downstate Democrats, Chicago Democrats, suburban Democrats. They're still very different. We're not monolithic. Now, here's the slide I wanted to show everybody, because I want you to understand how difficult it is to pass Chicago-based legislation. Remember I told about there are 118 members in the Illinois House of Representatives, correct? There are only 34 members from the city of Chicago in the Illinois House of Representatives. Does everybody remember how many Democrats I said we had? 67. Only 34 members of the Illinois General Assembly are from the city of Chicago. And 33 of those are Democrats and one's a Republican. So if we're going to pass any bill that's Chicago-based, it's going to require us to have buy-in from other people. And that's also why you see folks targeting Chicago and saying how, picking at Chicago and saying how, the Chicago-based legislation is they're bailouts. We're trying to do things just for Chicago because it's good politics. It's good politics to pick on the big guy. It's good politics to say, Chicago is the big bad beast in the Northeast, but they're all they are is they're eating up all the tax dollars. Well, it's really not true, but it makes for good politics. The next one shows the same reality in the Illinois Senate. 59 members in the Illinois Senate, only 18 of which are from the city of Chicago. So again, there's a dynamic that you really cannot pass Chicago-only legislation without buy-in from other people. It just doesn't work. Now, here's another one. I know I'm talking to some very astute people in this room, but I think it's also important that we understand how the rules are played. So how a bill becomes a law. So we're going to talk a little bit in a second about some of my legislative measures. So when we start, you start from the introduction of the bill, right? The bill then has read a first time. This is pursuant to law. The bill then goes through the committee stage, where we hear it in committee. So when I leave here, either tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to drive to Springfield. Tomorrow, as many of you know, I'm chairman of. So, for my legislative background for the 100th General Assembly, I'm the chairman of the House Judiciary Criminal Committee. I am the vice chairman of the Revenue and Finance Committee. I am on the Public Utilities, Executive, and Energy Committees. So when I leave here tomorrow, or tomorrow we'll have a committee hearing of the Judiciary Committee. So 4 o'clock tomorrow, we'll hear bills in the Judiciary Committee. Everything from, let me pause there for a second. Because I really need you all to understand the reality that we face in the Judiciary Committee. It is much easier for individuals to propose bills that enhance penalties than it is for them to propose bills that will roll back penalties. And because penalty enhancements, they make for good press. But reforming our criminal justice system is tough. And again, I'm going to talk to you about some of my legislative measures in a few minutes. But we are up against, right now, and again, as many of you have known and talked with me about, I am invested in reforming our state's broken criminal justice system. In the 1970s, we had about 7,000 people in our state's prison population, in the Illinois Department of Corrections. We are now at over 44,000 people in our state's criminal justice system. Now, that does not talk about the individuals who are under mandatory supervised release, which is parole. It does not talk about individuals who are on probation. It does not talk about people who have a conviction. Those are just people who are currently incarcerated in the Illinois Department of Corrections. So what I have been focused on the last several years is making sure that, one, our criminal justice system stops being so reactive, investing on the front end, investing in an educational system that would give our young people an opportunity, investing in our higher education system that will give folks a pathway to a better life, keeping them out of the system in the first place. But if you make a mistake and you get into the system, then how do we give you the opportunities to, once you've served your system or served your sentence, how do you go back to your fullest youthfulness? And that's what our state's constitution, it calls for that. It requires that. It says that clear as day in our state's constitution. Once a person serves their sentence, they are to be returned to their fullest youthfulness. But our state, we have not been doing that. So there have been barriers to employment, there have been barriers to housing, there are barriers to education, and we're trying to work through those. So, I'm sorry. So once you go to committee, then once it passes from committee, bill goes to the floor. That's second reading. Second reading is really where, if you didn't amend the bill in the committee stage, you can amend it on the floor for second reading. Third reading is final passage. Then it goes to the other chamber. So I would do this process in the Senate. The bill would then pass over to the House. I'll do this process in the House. The bill would then pass over to the Senate. Same process plays out over again. Bill then, if the bill makes it through that process, it then goes to the governor for signature. Now, if the governor signs it, it becomes law. If the governor vetoes it, it has to go back to the chamber where it started. So if I introduce the bill in the House, it would come back to the House. I have to pass it again and try to override the gubernatorial veto. The governor has used his veto, I would say about 30 times, 40 times, and I think he's been overridden 3. Certainly, so you see how difficult it is under this environment to overrule a gubernatorial veto. Now, I just talked about passing a bill. These are the numbers that matter. 60, 30, and 40. You gotta have 60 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate, and the governor's gotta sign it for it to become law. And then conversely, as I just talked about, if you gotta have to override a gubernatorial veto, 71 and 36. That has not been happening under this environment very often, but those are the numbers that matter. So we understand. Everybody remember how many Chicago members I said? So if we only have 34 Chicago members, we need how many more Chicago members to pass it? We need how many more members in the House to pass a bill? 26. So it means we got to get those votes from suburban members, downstate members, wherever we can get them from to pass the bill. So I talked to y'all a little bit about my legislative priorities and some of the things I'm working on. When you first sent me to Springfield, I promised you a couple of things. I promised you I would work on making sure we have the best schools for our children. I promised you I'd be fighting for good jobs in our community. I'd be fighting to make our community safe. And every legislative session, I go into a session with a game plan. I want to make sure that I am advancing those priorities. I am coming to you and I'm talking about those priorities, and I'm making sure that the legislative measure that I introduce and I advance forward those goals. So I talked to you a little bit about some of the criminal justice reform efforts I've been undertaking. This one is one that has been getting a considerable amount of press recently. Has anybody heard about the retail theft level? So if you go into Foot Locker right now, somebody go into Foot Locker, and they steal a couple pairs of Jordans. And those couple pairs of Jordans equal more than $300, $301. They are a felon. Under Illinois law, Illinois has one of the lowest retail theft thresholds in the country. Lower than Wisconsin, lower than Indiana. So I served on the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. So I told y'all I was going to move, right? Yeah, the podium had started to restrain me a little bit, so I had to get out. So one of the recommendations that the Criminal Justice Reform Commission talked about was increasing the threshold from $300 to $2,000 to reflect cost of living adjustments, reflect the reality that if you make a stupid mistake, so if somebody steals your iPhone, your cell phone, they're a felon. To me, that just, there is a difference between an organized retail theft ring and an individual who makes a stupid decision. If you have a young person who goes into the mall, steals a leather jacket, steals a bunch of clothes or whatever, trying to be stupid, just trying to be slick, I don't believe that person should be a felon for the rest of their life. There's something fundamentally wrong about that to me. So what I've done, I proposed a piece of legislation that would take that threshold from $300 to $2,000. Reflects it will reflect the thresholds in other states in the Midwest. It will reflect the threshold in other states around the country. California has a higher threshold. New York has a similar threshold. But again, to me, it just makes sense. If we're going to really reform our criminal justice system, we've got to be smarter on crime, than not just harsher on crime. Now, if you have not heard this, you probably will at some point. There was a press conference held last week. The retail merchants and the sheriffs came out in ardent opposition to my bill. They said we should not be incentivizing people to steal. That's certainly not my intent. But I found it telling that part of what they talked about in the items that they presented to their press conference, they talked about people stealing diapers, people stealing baby formula. To me, those are crimes of poverty.
Yeah.
That to me, that proves the point that we can simply not just lock people up, as opposed to giving people opportunities.
Were they white males?
The individuals at the press conference? Yeah, they were white males, but let's do this. Let's get the questions at the end. Let's get the questions.
This is the funny thing. They never touch on the white collar crime.
All right. We'll get the questions. We'll get there. But again, that was pretty telling to me. I want us to make sure that we are making the right decisions on crime. I don't just want to lock up everybody. I want to lock up the right people. I want to lock up and incapacitate those individuals who are a threat to our communities. If you are a threat to our communities, I don't believe you should be interacting with individuals. But I also don't believe you should be locked away for good. We should be taking the time to making sure that individuals are invested in. If there are underlying issues, maybe there's drug abuse in your background, maybe there's some substance abuse, maybe there's mental health challenge that you have. I think we need to be investing in people so that we are not only making sure that we are locking up everybody. So, give me the next one. Which leads me to House Bill 3342. House Bill 3342 is a bill I'm sponsoring that will make sure that the Department of Professional Regulation does not see each individual case as a blanket case. So if you commit a crime, the department should not be able to deny you a license, no blanket denial. They should be looking at each case individually and making a determination about the individual, making a determination about the crime, making a determination about the length of time before when the crime happened. All those things should be taken into consideration to make sure that the person is licensed. Because if we're going to make sure individuals go back to work, we got to give them an opportunity to get jobs. If we're going to improve communities, we can't say that people can't have opportunities to work. Because if they don't have opportunities to work, what's going to happen? They're going to go back to the criminal element. So we've got to give folks the opportunity to work. So that's one of the bills, and this bill, I posed this bill in committee last week. There was a host of opposition to it, so we're going to go back. I pulled it from the record before we even took the vote. So I went and talked to both members on both sides of the aisle. I believe we got some clarification on what the bill does, but more important, what the bill does not do. Now, again, I think that's part of the issue. Part of the issue is folks get so afraid that they don't want to be the subject of the campaign ad that says, "I let out a violent criminal." It's not the intent. The intent is to put people back to work. That's the intent. So, let me next slide. Here's another one I'm working on. Again, if we're going to make sure that we are investing in people, growing our economy, and strengthening our communities, we've got to incentivize businesses to locate in high crime, high poverty areas. So the creation of these hope zones, think of them as empowerment zones on steroids. So they are extraordinary incentives for people who have small businesses. There are extra incentives for individuals who hire ex-offenders, who hire individuals from high poverty areas, so we can make sure that we are incentivizing businesses to locate in areas. Particularly, so I thought when we came up with this idea of these hope zones, I thought about Roseland. I thought about Pullman. I thought about that corridor running down Cottage Grove and King Drive and State Street, so we can revitalize these areas. And doing the same in whether it's Calumet City, whether it's Chatham, whether it's West Chesterfield, whether it's West Pullman, North Lawndale, all of these areas, looking at these areas and really investing in them. Because we've got an unemployment rate for young men who are between the ages of 18 and 24 that is unbelievable. But we've got to put these young men to work. And we've got to incentivize businesses to grow, to come in, look in these areas and grow our economy. And we're going to do that. So this is one that I am working on with Republican sponsors. So we started from the very ground up. I said, I'll get to you. Hold your questions to the end for me, okay? We're working on this in a bipartisan fashion to get through these, to get these zones created and get them through, because we want to incentivize people to grow their businesses. I know that small businesses create 2/3 of all new jobs. And if we're going to have them and locating our communities and growing our communities, where small businesses are located, that's where they hire. So they hire locally and they grow locally. And that's going to make our communities grow. This is another one. As I go through schools throughout my district, be they Chicago State, be they Olive Harvey, but most important, be they Corliss High School or Dixon Elementary School or Beecher Elementary School, I hear something from the young people in those schools. I want to own something. I want to be something. I don't just want to go to work for somebody else. I want to have my own. And as I started, I've got an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old at home. So I hear from them as well. And we're looking around at trying to figure out, okay, how do you, is there a curriculum for young people to teach themselves how to be entrepreneurs? You know when that happens? They're available. It's available in higher education. By then, it's too late.
Right.
If you have a child who is a 5th grader, a 6th grader, a 7th grader, and they have the desire, feed it then.
Right.
By the time they get to higher education, they've already honed those skills. But if you feed it when they're a 5th grader, a 6th grader, a 7th grader, that they're learning about the things that interest them. They're learning about the things that are important to them. So why wouldn't the State Board of Education have a curriculum set aside and established that would help our young people become entrepreneurs? This doesn't make sense to me. So the House Bill 3368 calls on the State Board of Education to create a curriculum for entrepreneurship in schools, to teach our young people how to invest in themselves and invest in our communities. House Bill 3369, one of the things that you keep hearing from one of the reasons we have a lack of opportunities is that high-skilled manufacturing has left Illinois. Well, part of that is because we don't have a workforce that's trained in high-skilled manufacturing, in high-skilled manufacturing. So we have to create a curriculum, again, starting at the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade level, going into high school, so that young people are trained in these areas. So they have a focus on how are we going to work on identifying the opportunities that are there and getting involved in those opportunities. And making sure that our schools have this curriculum set aside so we can do that. Again, just does not make sense to me that we don't have that focus. I've been working with the Manufacturers Association because part of it, a lot of times they have these programs set aside for the associations, but I think they should be available throughout our schools. If we're going to have an educational system that works for all students, we've got to be prepared to deal with the challenges and the opportunities that will be facing us. Give me the next slide. House Bill 3372 is a program that makes it safe for young people to feel comfortable telling when there's a threat. Mm-hmm. So this is patterned after I wish I could take credit for the uniqueness of this program, but it's modeled after a Colorado law, where in the schools, they have a system set up where people can anonymously report threats against students. And because right now, we don't have that program currently in place. So individuals, if they don't feel comfortable reporting challenges and threats against students. But this program specifically allows for that. And it allows for us to establish that program so students can call, students or families can call. There's a hotline where they can identify those threats, and we can make sure that our students are safe. When our children leave our homes, we expect them to come home that night, and we expect them to come home safe. We expect them to come home better and have experienced things at school, and things that we never dreamed. We talked about this today in our press conference. Going through and seeing children in some of these elementary schools and high schools, and even here at Chicago State, the hope in their faces and the joy in their eyes when they learn something new, that's what fuels me. And when you see these children not have these opportunities, young people not have the opportunities, that frustrates me. The young woman, the 11-year-old, anybody know the name Takaya Holmes? Mm-hmm. She went to Schmidt Elementary School, which is right down the street. And so we went over to check on her, and we went to check on her classmates and how her teachers were doing and everything. And those young people, they were so amazing. They're amazing. They have gone through a tragedy, a trauma that I would never wish on my worst enemy. But they were resilient, and they were still there, and their educators filled my heart with hope and just with joy, because they are giving these children, they're feeding these children and their desire to learn. And so I went and we talked to them, and we asked them questions, and their little hands would go shooting up, and they were answering questions just because they love learning. But we've got to make sure we're investing in that. We've got to make sure we're creating those safe spaces for them. And when we don't, that's our failures, not theirs. Here's another one, another criminal justice reform measure I'm working on. You might have heard this bill number referred to in a radio ad or a television ad or something. It's House Bill 3717. Dr. Willie Wilson and I have been working on this measure to remove cash bail for nonviolent offenders. Mm-hmm. What we have found is oftentimes individuals are sitting in jail because they're too poor to pay. Again, does not make sense to me that in Cook County you'd be spending over $140 a day to house somebody who couldn't pay just to get themselves out for a parking ticket. Yeah. We have individuals who are there right now sitting in Cook County jail. There are over 500 people sitting there with bails of $500 or less. There are several hundred people sitting there with bails of $1,000 or less. And I applaud our new state's attorney, because she is focused on making sure that we are getting these nonviolent offenders out as well. But we want to make sure that we are reforming the system so that they never go in the first place. They're going into the criminal justice system and they're going into county jail because they don't have, and that's where they get their mental health services, that's where they get their substance abuse treatment. But if we invest in making sure our communities have them on the front end, they don't have to get incarcerated on the back. So I'm working on that one. So we're making some significant progress. I am very hopeful on this measure that we're going to get something done. We're going to get something meaningful done this session. Here's an area I know a lot of people want to talk about. Next slide. Joyce, let's dive right in. Right now, in 2015, more than 43% in the Illinois school districts, in 43 school districts, more than half of their students were low-income students. What does that mean? That means they're poor students. They don't have the resources other districts have. So oftentimes they come to school. That's the only hot meal they're going to get for the day. That may be the only time they're going to be warm for the day. That may be the only time they have an adult who is there all day with them. And when you have that reality, you come to school, it makes it very, very difficult to learn in that environment. But we have to understand understand that reality. This one, you can't really see this, and I know I can't see it because I don't have my glasses on, so I'm gonna walk a little closer. But this slide talks about the achievement gap between wealthy and poor districts. So it talks about if you are a wealthy student, and you're a wealthy student in 4th grade reading, you achieve 55%. Your achievement gap is more than 30% higher than a wealthy student. That's 4th grade reading. For 8th grade, the gap stays the same, 30%. And it keeps going up and up. So you figure college readiness, wealthier students are more ready for college, almost 40% more than their poor counterparts. The same is true for post-secondary enrollment. Malcolm X once said that education is a pathway to success. If we are not preparing and sending our kids to post-secondary education, and then more specifically, not completing post-secondary education, how can they be prepared to go to the next level? They're not. They're not. And you will often hear people say that money doesn't matter. Money doesn't make a good student. And I would say that's true. I'd say to an extent. You can have opportunities when you have resources. Your educational experience can be different if you have resources. You learn differently if you have access to a computer in your classroom, and then you have access to a computer at home. See, there's a difference because there's a difference, and I don't think folks understand oftentimes that there's a difference between how you see a website on your phone versus how you see a website on a computer.
Yeah,
The
that's true.
content that comes through is very, very different. You may get some content when you get it from your phone, but you get much more when you get it from a computer. And oftentimes, our young people, they have access to cell phones, they may have access to iPads, but again, the experience is different. So we are setting our children up for failure when we don't recognize that there is a gap, and there's an achievement gap between wealthier districts and poorer districts. How much we spend, the difference between how much we spend on wealthy districts to poor districts. We spend almost $2,500 more on wealthy districts than we are on poor districts. Again, why is that important? Well, you spend that much difference between one district to the next. That means there are different school books, textbooks that are available. There are different technological advancements that are available. I told this story at the press conference earlier today. There was one of the schools in the district. They have the contest with the children, and they said if the children would just bring a pack of paper, they could be out of their uniforms for the day. Fundamentally unfair that our children have to resort to those types of activities just to be able to get a fair educational experience. When our children when they don't have access to textbooks, and listen, our educators are doing, they're doing an amazing job with what they have. They've been hamstrung with a lack of resources. They've been hamstrung with a lack of investments, and this has continued over time. But it affects the educational experience of our children. Every $1 we spend on a wealthy student in Illinois, we spend 81 cents on a poor one. Let that sink in for a minute.
Wow.
For every $1 we spend on a poor student, 81 cents on a poor one. How can that be fair? The children who need the most get the less. Get the least. That does not, again, doesn't make sense. Our education funding system, so in addition to one of the committees I did not mention in the overview of the committees I serve on the Education Funding Task Force, trying to revamp the way that we fund our educational system. This is something we've been talking about since I was an undergraduate. When I was an undergraduate, my senior thesis was on education's broken education funding system. Now, I ain't gonna tell you how many decades later, but decades later, we're still talking about Illinois' broken education funding system. Because we have a regressive education funding system that's based on property wealth, not the wealth of the individuals in the community. So your educational experience is dictated by your zip code. There are areas where you could simply not tax enough to make up the difference between a wealthy district and a poor district. A home in, let's say, Wilmette, valued at $1 million, compared to a home in Dalton, valued at $75,000. They could never tax the same to make up the difference. It wouldn't happen. A home in West Chesterfield could not tax enough to make up the difference between a home in, say, Naperville. It does not work. Our educational funding system it's regressive. It is the most regressive education funding system in the country. And now, I'm gonna refer y'all back to that slide when I talked about the difference between needing 60 votes and how many votes we have, how many members we have in Chicago?
34.
When folks ask why can't y'all just pass something? Why can't you pass something that's good for us? That's why those numbers are important.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Because folks will say, well, I'm not going to bail out Chicago. I'm going to raise property taxes on my community to help yours. That's a bailout for Chicago. See, that's when you hear everybody ever heard that term, bailout? That's where those terms come in. Again, it's politics to play on the needs of the poor. You take advantage of those issues to make sure that you protect yourself. It may be good politics, but it's not good policy. So we are underfunding the educational system that makes sure that a certain segment of children will stay locked into a condition. Because that's the way the system is set up.
For them to fail.
Another one I know y'all want to talk about. Budget.
What budget? Right.
Budget. That's exactly right.